I'm going to hand you out some things to look at, but ask you to please not turn the pages, as curious as you are. We'll just do it slowly, more realistic. We'll turn page by page. Pretend we're on there's a slideshow here. You can't see the next slide yet. Do you have one? We'll give one for everybody else. Oh, we have enough? Okay. Okay. We're here to talk about how food can become chametz. Okay. What does it mean that? I mean, we all know the simple foods that can become chametz. The question is, if you look in our Pesach guide, or you go call up a rabbi and take him, is this thing chametz? The strangest things they're telling you are maybe chametz. Okay, the average things that we all know how you make foods chametz, we get that. We know what we're looking for. But all these other foods, how they could all possibly come from the five main grains. Like, where on earth do they come from? That's what we're here to talk about. How could it be that those foods could be chametz? Now, just one more introduction is that the bulk of the foods we're going to talk about today, especially as we move along, are actually not going to be chametz. Okay? They're potentially chametz. We're going to find out why they might be chametz, but we're also going to find out why they're almost for sure not chametz. Okay? And that plays into the decision when you come to your rabbi and say, Rabbi, can I eat this food? It's not okay for Pesach. It's even foods we ourselves, seriously, tell people certain foods are suffer chametz. Okay? And we're telling that because they shouldn't eat that without knowing that it's for sure kosher for Pesach. But their rabbi might say, under your circumstances, in the right situation, it's okay for you. You can have it. Okay? Understanding what we're going to talk about today will help in making that decision of, well, if the person came and said to me, I want to eat a bologna sandwich on Club, we'd say, no, you can't do that. Okay? But if you tell me I want to use this other product that's not nearly as serious as eating a piece of bread, well, how is the rabbi going to judge? Is that a more serious question or a less serious question? That's what we're going to talk about. To understand why the things could be chametz and therefore help you make that decision. Right? Okay, so we're going to start as follows. The front page is a simple page, and it tells us the way you make chametz. The way you make chametz is if one of the five grains is mixed with water and it sits there for 18 minutes. Okay, that's what chametz is. Okay, so the first box you see here is the obvious chametz. Okay, we have bread and crackers and pizza and pretzels. These are all things that we all know that they're chametz because they're obviously made from one of the five primary grains. We're talking first about wheat. That's the one that we use most commonly. Though you pick up a piece of pizza, obviously it's chametz. They take flour and they water, sat together for a long time, and they made a pizza out of it. Obviously that thing is chametz. Okay, those are the simplest ones. Everybody knows that those foods are chametz. Okay, a little more complicated than that, which people may not be as familiar with, is flour itself. Okay, why is flour chametz? Flour is just ground up wheat. Well, wheat is not chametz, right? You know, we make matzah out of wheat also. So why would flour be chametz? The reason is because the Gemara says that when you make flour for a covered mincha, you have to make it from soilus. You have to make it from very fine flour, which is to say, you need to remove the outer layers, the bran, from the flour to get only the finer, whiter parts that are in the center of the grain. In order to get that outer layers to come off better, you have to soak it in water. You have to put a certain amount of water onto it, and then after the outer layers absorb some water, they crack off easier and more completely from the inner layers. And that makes you get a finer flour. Now, in the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to have chametz either, except for two karbanos. All karbanos have to not be chametz. So they had to make soilus by putting water onto the grains without turning it into chametz. Okay, which is an art to be able to do that. You have to make it wet and has to then grind it in such a way that you turned it without making it chametz. But it wasn't just in the Beis Hamikdash. Everybody knew how to do that. It's called l'sisa. Everybody knew how to do that. That was a common thing to do. And you could buy, in the times of the Gemara, you could go into the store, buy a bag of flour, and make matzah for Pesach out of that flour. Okay? You just buy flour in the street, buy it, and make matzah out of it, because it was a common skill that people knew how to do, to let it sit in water, but not let it become chametz. Okay? In the Shulchan Aruch, it already says we don't consider ourselves to have that skill to be able to make it moist, but not make it into chametz. And the Shulchan Aruch accordingly says it's suffer chametz if you have flour that it has l'sisa done to it. Come out a little later, by the time of the Mishnah Berurah, he says, if you take the grains and you soak them in water for a long time, which it seems was the style, how they did it then, it's for sure chametz. If you just take a grain and dunk it into water, it's for sure chametz. No, you have to at least be trying to make it not chametz. If you're not even trying, you just dunk it into water, forget it, it's pure chametz. came about 50 years ago, and there's someone who you may have heard of. His name is Moshe Neishlos. He was the guy in Skver, and he took some grains that had lasisa done to it. In America, we call it tempering. Okay, he took tempered grains. He looked at them to see whether they were showing any signs of becoming chametz. Okay, now I don't know about you. I wouldn't know what I was looking at if I was looking, to me, grains are grains. But he knew what it looks like. I actually have pictures of what it's supposed to look like. But he looked at it and he didn't see many signs of chametz. He took those grains to Rosh Hashanah and said to him, okay, what do you think about this? Look at these grains. They just went through what's called a tempering bin, and are they chametz or are they not chametz? And between them they decided there were small signs of chametz, and that we should treat it, like it says in Shulchan Aruch, as a safek chametz. So flour, the bag of flour that's in your house, we would treat that as a safek chametz. Or there's a possibility of a certain amount of chametz being mixed into it, and it's a safek if it even became chametz. We would treat that stuff as a safek chametz. So flour, that's an example of something that's a little less obvious, because most people who think of flour just think of a ground up wheat. Well, that's probably, that's not as obvious as chametz, but in fact, and we'll see it in a couple of places, how that pops up. That's a safek chametz. Okay. You guys should really feel free to stick in your 2 cents.
Every flour is tempered?
Right now we're in wheat flour. We get to other flours in a second.
Wheat flour. When you buy a bag of wheat flour,
if you buy regular flour, not whole wheat flour, but again, the reason why you temper it is to help get the outer layers off when you're making whole wheat flour.
Stam, Pillsbury flour,
plain of course, yes, of course, it's because they want to make a white flour. If you don't temper it, your flour comes out speckled. It has little pieces of bran that get left behind, and that make it look not as fine, which is why it's not for the basement.
How long do they leave in the water when
Hours.
you temper it?
Hours. They don't leave it soaked in water. They put a very fine mist of water onto it. It's very controlled exactly how the moisture is in. They want moisture only to be in the outer layers and not the inner layers. They're trying to not make it chametz. They really are. They don't want it to become chametz. But the question is in din whether they did a good enough job. That's so they're trying to do it well. Okay. The next thing is something called sar. You've seen it in Chumash that on Pesach you're not allowed to own chametz and you're not allowed to own sar. Okay, and as I just explained to you for a minute, for those who aren't familiar, what sar is. Okay, sar is, the English word for sar is sourdough. Okay, what sourdough is that if you mix flour and water together, as I said, let it sit for 18 minutes, it's going to become chametz. Okay, but when you make bread in your house, you don't just mix flour and water together. We throw in yeast also, and that's because yeast speeds up that process and makes the chametz happen the way it's supposed to. If you just mix flour and water together with no yeast, you don't put any yeast into it, yeast from the atmosphere are going to get into there and help the chametz happen. And with time, it'll become chametz. No one's patient enough to sit around and wait for that to happen. So we open up a little package or open a can and pour some yeast in. Okay, but if you're a baker, you go to Tel Aviv bakery, that's not what they do. I don't think they pour it in from a can of yeast. What they do is like this. Every time they make a batter of dough, they take a ball of that dough, they stick it in a warm spot. The favorite spot is next to the oven. Okay, it's a nice warm spot. And they put it there. And what happens is, in that ball of dough, there's flour, water with a tiny bit of yeast, whatever flew in or where it's from, and it sits there for a whole day. And that sitting there for 24 hours, what's going to happen is, the yeast is having a party. The yeast is mamash in Gan Eden over there. I mean, it's warm. There's lots of things to eat, and it'll eat away at the ball of dough, and turn that ball of dough into a bowl of yeast. That's what it's going to do. When yeast eats sugar, it converts it into alcohol and carbon dioxide, and it turns it into it'll have a party. It'll start partying away. That's what's going to happen there. By the time you come back tomorrow, that bowl of dough is not going to be a bowl of dough anymore. I mean, it'll look like a bowl of dough, but it's going to taste awful. That's why it's called sourdough. It's become chametz. It becomes horribly disgusting. Nobody wants to eat it. It is a very high concentration of yeast in it. And what the baker does is he takes that bowl of dough and he throws it into tomorrow's batter. Okay? So on Monday he makes one batter. He puts a bowl of dough on the side. On Tuesday when he comes to make bread again, he takes that bowl back and throws it into his dough. It tastes awful. Like the Gemara says, it tastes awful. That's why it's called sourdough, because it's sour. The dough has become sour. But now he's got a whole concentration of yeast. It doesn't just have yeast in it. It has a lot of character to the flavor, much more than you have in your little package at home. He makes this, they use that for today, then he pulls out another piece and sticks it for tomorrow. So that sourdough is asur midaraisa. That's chametz d'oraisa. We don't usually see sourdough. some people want to bake at home will go to the bakery or make it themselves, sourdough. We don't usually have it so much. But sourdough contains yeast. Okay? But yeast is not sourdough. Okay? So the yeast that's in your fridge, we're not going to get to the very last page. You're going to find out where the yeast in your pantry comes from. Okay? But that's not sour. But if you have real sour contains yeast, but yeast is not sour. Okay, I'm confused.
Sour is chametz. In addition to being sour, it sounds like it's chametz also. It is.
What do you mean also?
Meaning like it sounds like it's sour, not chametz.
Well, if we were looking with the traditional view, we would say it's not chametz because it's not edible. Because the Gemara says no one could possibly eat this stuff anymore. It's disgusting. It's all day long it's been turning itself into this ball of yeast. But even so, the Torah says you can't have chametz and you can't have sour because sour has this property that it makes other things into chametz. Okay? What exactly that means is not for today, but it is used as a food. You take sour, you throw it right back in. They don't have the dough by mistake. They have very much a purpose. We went to a company that makes it. They had a batch of. They did it differently. They had like a container of their sourdough, and every day they took out half of it and poured in more flour for tomorrow. It had been going for 9 years. This batch. Okay, it had been going for 9 years straight. This thing. Every day they took out.
Used as not as that in some places.
The bakery. Every baker is. It's well, you've seen it. If you buy like sourdough pretzels, that means those pretzels have that sourdough because it doesn't just have yeast. It has a certain character or flavor to it also. But yeah, bakers use it because it gives a much better product than the yeast that we use in our houses. Yeah, people use it. This company baked bread with it. They had been going for 9 years straight. The same batch. Every day they put in, they would not serve and nothing so. They put in half and they took out half. And then tomorrow, well, they took out first. They take out first, add in more, but come back tomorrow and tata, we're back in business again. Okay?
Am I correct in remembering that Rav Shetzer quotes a Ravid based on this din of soor for Crisco, that any ingredient that's used as a normative ingredient, even though it's
yes. I don't know what Crisco has to do with it, but yes, it has to do with Chaim Ozer. Yes, it's a different time. I said we're not going to talk about that thing. Yes, there's a whole Chaim Ozer has a Havana of this din that's not chametz specific. It's a more general din. Yes, correct. Okay. So we have these two little boxes so far. Okay, so we have different chametz, the ones that are more obvious, the ones that are a little less obvious. Okay, a little less obvious. Okay, then there are some things that you only have to look to see that they have chametz in them. Okay, you might not have guessed it. You might not have thought that licorice has chametz in it. You guys wouldn't, because you're only bracha, can't say bracha. So you would have thought that licorice has flour in it because you're trying to figure out what bracha to make in it. Okay, but you might not have thought that your pet food has chametz in it. Okay, or what else would have you? Pringles or soy sauce. Okay, soy sauce is made with soy, obviously, fermented soy, but there's almost always a second grain in there, and the second grain is very commonly wheat. Okay, so you look at it. You don't have to be a brilliant genius. So look at the package and see it says wheat is the second or third ingredient. That's pretty common.
So is that chametz gomer?
Yeah, that's plain old chametz. Yeah, that stuff is pure chametz. Yeah, and then there's some things that are less obvious. So I said to you, I told you that flour is chametz, or flour is a suffer chametz. Well, that means that obviously if I have matzah that's not Pesach matzah, it's year-round matzah, well, that's automatically suffer chametz because it's got flour in it. Okay? But it's a little worse than that because when you make matzah, there's a real skill to making matzah and not letting it become chametz. Okay, well, no one's paying any attention to the year-round matzah. Okay, the Pesach matzah, they're being careful about all kinds of things to make sure it doesn't become chametz. No one could care less when they're making year-round matzah. Okay, so those things are chametz. Denner fiber is a laxative that a couple of years ago switched from being, I forgot what it used to be. It used to be nothing, and now it switched into becoming, there's only one ingredient, it's just wheat dextrin. Okay, so it's just, but again, some things you have to just look at the ingredients, and it just strikes you, it's right in your face, you see it. Okay, and the last one on this list here, I see here is Play-Doh. Okay, Play-Doh has its own chilice to it, but Play-Doh is flour and water. That's the basic ingredients that there are to it, is flour and water. A few other ingredients, but basically it's flour and water. There are shilas, whether it's usher, but, excuse me, before you get to the shilah, you have to at least have known that there was question in the first place. Okay, you have to even realize that there was even a shilah to whether it should be. Okay. And then the last little bit here is, there are some things that they're not chametz, and there's nothing listed in the ingredients that's chametz, but there might be chametz mixed into it. There might be wheat mixed into it. As an example, you probably all have heard already by now that quinoa is kosher Pesach. It's not chametz or kidneys. But the same people who package quinoa also package other little grains. So in your package of quinoa, you might have other grains mixed into it. Okay, just the other day, The CRC was checking a certain grain. I'm not going to tell you which one. A different one, which is not chametz or kidneys. And there was something very suspicious going on in that package. We don't know yet what it is. Something else that sure wasn't what it was supposed to be in there. It's in there. Okay, so that means it's the same person who's packaging it, or the same farmer who's trucking this stuff. I don't know how you say muling the stuff. He'll carry it, however he carries it through his farm in the middle, Mamish in the middle of no place. What else does he do in his bags? We don't know. So those kind of things, if there's chashas that there might be chametz mixed in, so those are things to look for. Okay?
Quinoa this year, according to the CRC, is what?
We tell people they should look for hashkacha. This year there are a number of hashkachas, brands that have hashkachas on them. We tell people look for hashkacha.
Kosher Pesach.
Kosher Pesach.
And what are the guys who say it's Kosher Pesach doing? How do they know that it's really kosher?
So they're tracking it from where it was made all the way through. There's a couple of places where you can go wrong. I mean, the first is the farmer who's it's okay, he can do whatever he wants to. So one's tracking from there where it's packed, etc. to make sure it's kosher Pesach. In previous years, we had told people take the kinma and check it by hand, like Sfardim check rice. Just check it by hand. I mean, you could see if you look through the grains, you'll see the ones that don't belong. We checked this other grain. It was this other item. It was pretty clear what didn't belong there. We don't know what it is yet, but suspicious. But we'll find out. Okay. Anyhow. Stay tuned for the latest tumble, But I think you could look at, if you look at kinma, if you have kinma and you look at the grains, they all look the same. And the one that looks odd, you'll know that it doesn't belong there. But now this one's hashkacha, so that makes life easier. Okay, let's move on. So that was wheat, okay? I hope you guys...
Would you be somewhat on bittul from our Pesach? Or?
Oh, that's a good question. I was maybe not going to talk about that. The question is, that's a good question. We know that chametz before Pesach is bottled. So I buy a bag of quinoa. Okay, it's got in it 10,000 little pieces of quinoa in it, and there's 4 pieces of, let's say, barley mixed into it. I say it's bottled. Before Pesach, everything can be bottled. So the answer is, the reason why that's not fully accurate is because there's one case where we hold up that chametz is the word that the person uses chayzer. They don't really mean that. Sort of chayzer, and that is by yavish b'yavish. Okay, if we have dry materials. I don't mean dry is not the right word. Individual items. But we just don't know which one is chametz and which one is not, and they're mixed together. The din is that it's bottled. Yavish b'yavish can be bottled also. It means if I can't identify which is which, it could be bottled. But that bittul is a continuous bittul. It's not bottled once and gone. It's bottled. You're continuously reevaluating that bittul, and therefore on Pesach it's not going to be bottled anymore. So quinoa would be an example of that. If there's 1,000 kernels and one of them in there is barley, it's not bottled. Because that one that's in there, it's yavish b'yavish. There's a million little kernels. They all look the same. I can't tell which is which. The one that's chametz is the one that's going to be not bottled. Okay, there's another example. I'll say one more thing. There's one more example of that is if any of you use rice cereal for children, okay, it comes in flakes, flaked rice cereal. So in a rice cereal that's flakes, the same companies also make oatmeal rice cereal, oatmeal flaked cereal, and most people, even more than quinoa, you couldn't ever tell the difference between one flake and the next. Okay, but those flakes are yavish b'yavish. Those flakes are each individual. It's not a powder even that's considered just one big mass. This is each individual. If you pour it on the table, you'll see the flakes are individual pieces. Okay, they're individual items. That's a bit of yavish b'yavish. So if there's a chashash, if there's oatmeal flakes mixed into there, it's not bottled before Pesach. It's bottled before Pesach. It's not bottled on Pesach. You can't eat it on Pesach.
Isn't there prima donna about like flour being...
Yeah, flour, that's when it's a fine powder.
Flakes aren't...
Right, the flake is too big flakes. These flakes are individual. If you pour it on the table, you'll see that they're individual pieces. It's not like flour. It's not flour. No, this is beyond flour. It's not, and the quinoa is 100 times more than that. The actual pieces. The quinoa has more problems. The quinoa has... Because in the quinoa, if you actually look carefully, you could pick out which ones don't belong. Okay, but in the flakes is a real example of yavish b'yavish, because you never pick out which one. I mean, how would you know which is which? They all look the same. They all, so that's a yavish that's not bottled before Pesach. Okay, I mean, it's bottled before Pesach, it's not bottled on Pesach. You can't eat it, So today you could eat it kosher Pesach, but on Pesach you can't eat it. If that makes any sense. Okay. So let's move on. We haven't even gotten off our first page yet. Okay, hope you guys are patient. The next thing is oats. Okay, the next of the 5 grains we're going to talk about is oats, and you may or may not be familiar. The Torah lists off. The Mishnah lists off 5 grains that we know could become chametz. Okay, there's a machlekes rishonim what shibon l'shul means. The machlekes rishonim how to identify that species that says Shibboleth Shul. The Gemara translates each one of them into an Aramaic word. A lot of good that did us, right? Translate into Aramaic, a lot of good that did us. But then there's a machlokes rishonim what the min of Shibboleth Shul is. The din is that the poskim will say that the din is like Rashi, who says that it means oats. Okay? Rashi says that it means oats, and that's how we paskin. But came, 30, 40 years ago, there's a botanist, an Israeli botanist, I don't know if he's Shem Shabbos, but an Israeli botanist who looked into it. It says he had all kinds of reasons to think that oats couldn't be Shibboleth Shul. He didn't come from a halachic perspective. He wasn't coming and saying, because he held like this and this sheet in the Rishonim. He wasn't coming like that. He was coming from historical and botanical associations as to whether it could possibly be. And there were two reactions to what he had to say. Two on one side of this. Some people agreed with him. Okay. But on the other side, there were two reactions. One was a halachic reaction, which was like, very nice that you don't agree botanically, but guess what? If Rashi said it and all the Rishonim said that it means oats, and that's what it is. Yes, and we have a Masari that that's what it means, so don't bother me. That was like a halachic answer, which was, I don't care that you have these reasons, but halachically, the halachic tradition is this way, and that's what it is. That's it. That's what it is. And then others responded from a different perspective, from a botanical perspective, that they disagreed with his proofs. He had proofs and indications that he was right, and they came from an academic perspective and said, your proofs that you're bringing are not correct. There are others who disagreed with him, and part of it has to do with a very interesting shiloh, not for today, an interesting shiloh, which is, when Chazal said that these 5 minim can become chametz, and every other min is masriach, it spoils, what did they have in mind? What were they pointing at when they had that in mind? And there's two theories as to what that means. There's 2 theories. One is that the Chazal meant that these grains, these 5 grains, produce barley. They produce beta amylase. So they produce a certain enzyme which is stronger than other enzymes, and it allows chimutz to happen before it allows sirchon to happen. Sirchon is other kinds of fermentations. That's one variation, and the other variation is that what they were identifying is that these 5 grains have gluten in them. Gluten is a type of protein that, as the fermentation occurs, it holds the gases inside rather than letting them escape. Okay? It helps it just puff up rather than other grains where it doesn't puff up. The gas will escape, so it doesn't puff up. And depending on that, maybe depending on whether oats could possibly be one of the chamishes means other. Okay, that's not for today. There's a totally maybe in that shiloh. Okay, anyhow, so from the oat things, so the obvious thing that we have from oats is we have oatmeal. That's probably how most of us see our oats. Just oatmeal, which is ground up oats. We treat oats as suffolk chametz. The oats that you have in your pantry, we treat them as suffolk chametz. And the reason why it's a suffolk is because oats are different than the other grains, and that oats need to be heat treated before they are put away for storage. Wheat doesn't have to be. Wheat and barley and these things just have to be dried out. And if they're dried out, they'll last for 1,000,000 years. They don't rot. But oats will turn rancid if you don't heat treat them. And, that heat treatment could be done with moisture or without moisture. If the heat treatment is done with moisture, that's something that the Gemara calls chalita. Okay, when you take a grain and you dunk it into boiling water, that prevents chimutz. Okay, the heat kills enzymes and prevents chimutz. But the Gainim said we're not considered bekim to do chalita anymore. So we would treat oats as a suffix because it potentially had chalita, and chalita we would treat as suffix. It maybe didn't. It could be just dried with heat, dry heat, and it never had any contact with moisture, in which case it would be fine. Okay, but that's a shiloh. So we would treat oats just like, and for a different reason, but similar to flour, that we treat as suffix chametz if you had that around.
Is that just a metzias what the companies do?
Yeah, it's a metzias question.
But some companies do want.
Yeah, if you do just dry, if you do the heat treatment, the point you need heat in order to kill off these enzymes. If you use a heat treatment without any moisture, you're in business. Nothing wrong. Nothing. You just heated it. You actually made it better because it can't become chametz anymore. The question we just don't know. You have to just go to the company and figure out what they did.
So that's how they make the oat matzahs.
Well, I'm not going to talk about oat matzahs, but hold on a second.
It can't become chametz anymore if we just do the heat treatment.
Yeah, if you do
dry heat.
Right, if you do the dry heat, it is not chametz already, and it won't become chametz either.
When you mix it with water.
Correct. It won't become chametz. So actually,
if you dry heat it, you can make oatmeal.
That's a question. There's a question about the oat matzahs. We're not for today. The shy about the oat matzahs. It used to be that they made the oat matzahs after the heat treated it, or else the oats wouldn't last. Okay, so it's a shayla, a machlokes rishonim, whether that's kosher l'masa, whether it's such a thing that can come, right, correct. That's a shayla, machlokes rishonim. Okay, they don't do that anymore. Nowadays the oat matzahs have corrected themselves and they don't use heat-treated oats. Anyway, okay, let's go on. So the last three that are on the bottom, you see, are suspiciously have nothing underneath those, okay, are spelt rye and barley, okay, and the good news about those three is that the way we see them usually, just in their pure form, what I mean is, obviously, if you buy rye crackers, you know that those are probably chametz. Okay? You shouldn't eat those on Pesach. You shouldn't keep them on Pesach either. You get that. You know that. But the place where we have the question is when people have just a bag of barley in their house, they use it for soup, or a bag of spelt flour that they use for whatever they want to make out of that thing. Okay, they made a spelt muffin, they already figured out, I shouldn't keep that on Pesach. Most people get that. But the shot is in their pure form, these three have no contact with water in the process of making them ready for the market. Okay, when you make the barley that you have in your house, it's called pearled barley. Pearling means they scrape off an outer layer to give you the inner part, which is the part that we eat. Okay, well, there's no water in that. It's a mechanical process. They just scrape it off. There's no moisture involved. And the same for the rye and spelt flour also. So those, if you have them, they're not chametz. Okay, if you want, the mamish came up on the show. So if you want to take your rye flour and make matzahs out of it for Pesach, you can. Okay, you can't eat them for the seder because they're not shmur, but you could make them if you want to make matzahs on Pesach. So if you're foolish enough, then you can do it. Yeah.
One could make barley soup on Pesach.
No, because as soon as you put it into the water, it's going to become chametz. No, so if you make barley soup, you're really up the creek. But if you want to make rye matzahs, you can do that. Okay. If you want to use it in a way that doesn't cause chametz later on. So most people, I mean, we're in a whole different world. 100 years ago, everybody made matzah on Pesach. You bought flour just like you made potato cocoa. You also made matzah. That's what you had to eat. So we don't do that anymore. We're too afraid that it's going to become chametz while we're working with it. They're very dangerous because it's asur b'mashu. So it's pretty dangerous. So we don't even dream of that kind of stuff. You know? But
in our shtibel growing up, on Erev Pesach, we used to make matzahs.
Right, so if you were in a shtibel, you made an Erev Pesach matzah. That's true. But most other people wouldn't go near it, and the Grot could help that you shouldn't make what they call matzahs mitzvah for exactly that reason, because of asur mashu. But people used to do that. People used to make matzahs at home. That was, anyhow. But if you want to, you could do it today. You could go home, take rye flour, go to the store, buy rye flour, mix it with stuff, and you have to learn the dinim first, find how to make matzah that it shouldn't become chametz. I mean, like there's some dinim you might not have guessed, like you can't make it in a room that has windows, because the sunlight that comes in causes chimutz. Okay, so you have to really know what you're doing. Don't try this at home. But if you know what you're doing, you could do this at home. You could buy rye flour because it's not chametz. Okay, so there's an interesting nafkamina. I'll just mention it. We're moving along nice and slowly, but I'll mention a nafkamina. It comes like this, just for your havana, and that's like this. The Gemara says there are two shittas as to what it takes to make matzah to be matzah shmura. For the seder, you have to eat matzah that's shmura. There's two shittas what they have to be. Either the matzah has to be shmura from the time of katsira, or the matzah has to be shmura from the time of lisha. Okay, those are the two shittas in the Gemara. Lo and behold, there's a third shita pops up that's not in the Gemara, and that is from the time of tchina, from the time of grinding. You have to have also. You look at Shulchan Aruch, there are 3 days. Okay? Well, where do we get this third day from? There's only 2 days in the Gemara, either from the time of katsira or from the time of lisha. Where did this shita come from that you have to shas tchina? Where did that come from? Okay, so it's a rush. Okay, so the rush says, I'll tell you what it's from. It's because what's the difference between these two shitas? What's the machlokes between whether it has to be mishas katsira or mishas lisha? Mishas katsira is the time when it could become chametz. The mishas lisha is the time when it's likely to become chametz. Okay, when you cut it off the ground, now it's physically possible to become chametz. So some hold the shmir has to be from that time when it could possibly become chametz. And some hold that the shmir has to happen from the time that it's becoming in contact with water, that now, if you're not careful, it's going to become chametz. We're like very dangerous at that point. That's what the Torah said you have to do shmir for. That's the machlokes. So he says, well, nowadays, we temper our flour. And we have mills that work with water. So our flour, already from the time of lisha, has contact with water that it can become chametz. So there's this third shita that holds that when the Gemara said it has to be mishas lisha, the Gemara's mishas lisha is our mishas tchina. For us, tchina is like the Gemara's lisha. So that's a third shita that now you have to mishas tchina. Right. So now, most people, the Shulchan Aruch says there are 3 days. Most people are careful to get matzah that's shmur mishas katsira to eat at the seder. because we want to make sure we're being good to the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah deraisa. We want to make sure we're being good to. We do shmir b'shas ketira. Let's say you're not doing that. Let's say you're eating a machine matzah. That's not shmur b'shas ketira. Most machine matzahs are not. So now you have a choice. And forget about if it could be. Let's assume that a machine matzah could be considered shmura. You could eat. There's loads of yidden who eat machine matzah for the seder. Okay, they don't eat hand matzah. They eat machine matzah. That's not shmura. If they have a choice, should they eat wheat matzah or should they eat spelt matzah? Which one do you think they should eat? So it comes out that they should eat spelt matzah, because the spelt matzah is shmura mishas, so to speak, tchina. It's not really shmur mishas tchina. But spelt matzah doesn't need to be shmur mishas tchina. The Magen Avraham says, if you live in a place that they don't temper and they don't use water mills, that's us. Our rye is not tempered and they don't use water mills. I mean, last we've seen, right? Not in this part of the world. They don't use water mills. So if you have to eat machine matzah, you're better off eating rye or spelt machine matzah, because that one is according to two shitas, that's going to be considered to be shmura. Whereas if you eat the wheat matzah, it's only shmura if you hold that you only need shmura mishas lisha. Because it's not shmura mishas tchina. So if it's not shmura mishas tchina, but the rye matzah is effectively shmura mishas tchina, because according to those Rishonim that say that you need that, that's only an extension of mishas lisha. The Magen Avraham says, but if you have a thing that doesn't have water, has no contact with water in the processing, like rye and spelt flour, then it never does all year round. Then for those, there's no even tzad that you need to have shmur mishas ketira, mishas tchina, and therefore you're better off eating those matzahs better than eating the wheat matzahs. Okay, so come down enough for me, you're better off. Agam the Shulchan says you're better off eating wheat matzahs. That's for a different shmuz why the Shulchan says it. But in this situation, if the person was eating hand matzah, he had a choice, he'd be better off with his rye or spelt than he would be with the wheat. Okay?
Standard
Machine matzah. If hand matzahs are all shmur mishas ketira, then you have no difference. Then you go back to the Shulchan says it's better to eat wheat matzah.
Standard non-shmur is mishas lisha. That's just
standard machine matzah, mishas lisha. Sometimes it's mishas tchina. It's very questionable. It has to do with the details of what it takes to make matzah shmura. What I mean is, there is a yid, a shomer Shabbos, who's paying attention from the time of tchina. I just told you, they temper the flour, and they don't use water, but they temper the flour. So there's a yid who's paying attention to make sure they don't go wrong over there. Whether he qualifies as making it shmur or not shmur, that's a question. That's not for today. That's a shayla whether he is. It's for sure mishas lisha, it's shmur. But whether it's mishas tchina depends on the details of what it takes to make matzah shmur. That's not for. There's someone watching. So someone paying attention. Whether that person qualifies, it's a shayla. That's a question. Okay, we're ready to turn the page. Look at that. Okay, hopefully we'll move a little faster than this part. Okay, now what we're going to do is like this. What you're seeing in front of you is the beginnings of a flow chart. Okay, if I showed you the whole flow chart at once, I think it would be overwhelming. So as we move along, the pages are going to build more and more. You can see, if you could see through the paper, you can see on the next page already more is coming. You know what I mean? So we're going to slowly make our way through this flow chart. Okay, and you'll see each page is going to make it a little bigger. By the time it's finished, you'll say, "Wow, look at this thing." Okay, it's a little scary by the end, but if you go through it slowly, it's a little more manageable. Okay, the first couple of pages are going to be things that are more simply chametz. Okay, and they go like this. If you take a piece of barley, this doesn't work at home because it's already been probed. They took off the outer layers. But if you took a real piece of barley, a natural piece of barley, and you stick it into, okay, what is that piece of barley made out of? What do you got? What's in there? And you guess it.
It's malt.
Really? What kind of enzyme do you have in there? Oh, it says it there. Okay. What do you have in there? The barley, the seed is primarily starch. Primarily, it's made out of starch. Why is it made out of starch? Not because we taste good in our tongue, I mean, that also, but the real reason why the Rebbeinu made it full of starch is because seeds are meant for plants to grow from. Okay? The plant's got to grow. So in there's a tiny thing in there, the germ, which is actually what's going to help the plant grow. That's what's going to grow. Well, the plant needs some energy to grow until it can produce for itself. So it needs enough energy to get some roots out, and some flowers out, some leaves out, and then it's, so to speak, self-sufficient. It'll be on its own. So what's packed into that seed is enough to get it going for the first couple of days, and enough to get it going till it's self-sufficient. Okay, so it can function where it is. Okay, so the starch is there. That's the energy source for the plant to grow on. Okay, now me and you, we're much more developed than a barley plant. We can't live on starch. If you put starch into your blood, you're not going to get any place. I don't know. You probably get to the hospital, but you're not getting any place if you put starch into your body can't use the starch as is. Your body has to break down the starch. Starch is I got one. I'll make a picture here. Starch is hundreds of sugar molecules attached to each other. They're long chains of sugar molecules. And starch, so when you have a starch that has all these sugar molecules together, your body breaks it down into individual sugars, and sugar, that gives you energy. Right? So you eat starch, breaks it down to all these individual sugars, and then you could use it. We have to do that, and the barley plant for sure has to do that. So the Rebbe gave it not just the germ and the starch, but the barley is waiting there, and when conditions are right, it's warm, it's moist, everything's ready to go. It says, okay, time to release this enzyme. So it creates, and I don't know if it creates it, but it for sure releases an enzyme called barley beta amylase. Okay, it has a fancy name. It releases an enzyme, and that enzyme takes the starch and breaks it down into sugars, which it then eats. It then eats those sugars to start itself growing. Right? It got the signal. Okay, it's warm, it's moist, ready to go, and it releases the enzyme, breaks down the starches in the plant, in what we eat, in the seed, and then it starts to grow. Okay? Now that enzyme is, in the world, very valuable. That enzyme that the barley plant, that little cutie little barley plant releases, that's a very valuable enzyme that can break down starches into sugars. Okay? It's so valuable. Most people, traditionally, they use it from barley. They don't get it, they don't make it in the lab. They just take it from barley. Okay, that's a traditional source to get it. It's very common to get it from there. So if you take barley, and the word is that you steep it, you let it sit in warm water under the right conditions, it'll start to grow. And it'll make two things. If the enzyme works on the barley and breaks down the starch, that's something called malt. You may have heard it called malted barley or barley malt or a whole bunch of different names like that, but it's all the same thing, which is you've let the barley break down the starch into a sugar. I meant to bring this. I forgot to bring this. Did you ever taste corn syrup? Anybody here ever taste corn syrup? Okay. Anybody ever tasted Pepsi? Okay, it's sweetened with corn syrup. Okay, well, it tastes really sweet. Okay, I meant to bring it. I forgot to bring it. I have at home corn syrup. You go home, you probably have it in your house also. A taste of corn syrup, it's very, very sweet. It tastes like sugar. That's why we use it to flavor Pepsi, because it tastes sweet. Okay, so it has a sweet taste to it. Well, that used to be corn. That used to be plain corn. Corn doesn't have a very sweet taste. Certainly not the sweetness of it. But corn is very starchy. When you break it down into sugars, it becomes like sugar and becomes sweet. Okay, when you take a long starch and you break it up into individual sugars, those individual sugars taste like sugar and they're sweet. It's the same thing as sugar and it tastes sweet. So malt or malted barley or barley malt, whatever you want to call it, has a very sweet taste to it. And it's used like you see here. If you look at your Rice Krispies, you'll see in it. You look at your Rice Krispies or your cornflakes or your cornflake crumbs, or a lot of things like that are flavored with barley or barley malt. And that is to say they took the starch, broke it into the sugar, and then that sugar has a sweet taste to it. It has a very unique taste to it. They use it for flavorings and to give sweetness to it. Okay, so that's one thing you can do. You turn the barley into malt. And then the malt is used as an ingredient in things. The other choice is you could just take the enzyme. That is to say you put it into the water, the plant releases its enzyme, and before the enzyme works on the barley, you hop the enzyme. You stop the process, you take the enzyme away from it. Okay? We're going to find out in a second why on earth you'd want to do that. Okay, but you have two choices. You can either let the enzyme do its work and turn it into malt, or you could take the enzyme for yourself and use it for something else. Okay, so malt, chametz, absolute pure chametz. Okay, it's just barley, sat in water, and turned into malt. Okay, the enzyme is also chametz. It also comes from barley sitting in water for a while, but so far no one eats the enzyme by itself.
When it's in water, it's not being cooked. It's just sitting there. So
sitting in moist, warm water.
When you would cook it, it would not turn into malt.
No, what happens when you finish the process, then you cook it to stop the process. If you cook it, it wouldn't work. You put it in warm water, and then it says, time to grow. It thinks things are warm. If it would be in hot water, it actually would kill the enzyme. You put it into warm water, it starts to grow, and it becomes chametz. Of course it becomes chametz. If you leave it even for too long, it actually begins to sprout, even literally to sprout. Like, but yeah, it's chametz. If 18 minutes, it's chametz. That's it. You're finished. In warm water, even less than 18 minutes. So, okay. Turn the page again, guys. Okay. So that was the easy one. Okay. Now, let's say you take this enzyme. And instead of letting it do its work on the barley, you took the enzyme for yourself. You stop the process, so you hop the enzyme, and you take the enzyme and you put it into some other starch. It's very common that you do this. Okay, you put it into some other starch. what it's going to do is it's going to break down that starch into sugars, just like it would have done to the barley. It does it to something else. It breaks into a kind of sugar that we call maltose. Okay, it's a certain blend of sugars. There's actually 6 types of sugar, I think, if I remember correctly, 5 or 6. And maltose is a specific blend of what they are. So if you put barley, the enzyme from barley into these starches, you're going to make maltose. And maltose itself is very common in hard candies. If they tell me that the reason why they use it in hard candies is because maltose is less sticky, and so the candies don't stick onto the wrappers when you use maltose instead of another sugar. Okay, so it has nothing to do. It's just as sweet, and I believe it's less calories than other sugars do. But they use it. So go figure that they're using it because they don't want it to stick onto the wrapper. Okay, so it has maltose. You get the hint that it has maltose. Probably something to do with malt, having to do with barley. So that now it depends which grain they used. Did they use barley, rye, corn, rice? You could make maltose out of any starch. Okay? You could have taken any starch, put barley into it, and it would turn into maltose. Doesn't make a difference. You take potatoes and put this enzyme into it, it'll also turn into maltose.
But perhaps someone could wonder whether or not the enzyme itself has a status of chametz because it came from, let's say it sat there for 18 minutes before you extracted the enzyme. Mm-hmm. So do you say like efshel afrido that the enzyme is not chametz because doesn't have any whatever starch or anything, or is an enzyme chametz?
Okay, we would assume that the enzyme is chametz. You're saying if we really understood which part of the item is the chametz and which is the non-chametz, we might say is the enzyme is this and the starch is this, and each piece like that. We don't consider ourselves to know enough to be confident enough to say is the enzyme is not what the Rebbe had in mind, and it's only the malt that the Rebbe had in mind. We wouldn't do it. We would say if it's had in water for 18 minutes, whatever comes out of there is chametz. We wouldn't differentiate and say this part yes and this part no. That's too. Maybe there's somebody who used to know that. We don't even dream to be qualified to do that. But what I said to you is if you take potatoes and you put this enzyme into it and you make maltose out of that, okay, then for sure it had a maimed of chametz. The chametz turned corn into corn syrup. That's a maimed. It made this dramatic change in the corn syrup. Okay, but whether the thing is actually chametz depends on which starch you started with. You could start with any starch you want to make the maltose. You could start with wheat, then it would be pure chametz. You could start with corn, then it would be kidneys with a chametz maimed. You could start with sweet potatoes, and then you have nothing, Kashrus Pesach, with a chametz maimed. Well, those are very different worlds. One is chametz, one is asur d'rabbanan, and one is also asur d'rabbanan, but even less asur d'rabbanan. We have different levels over here of what it could be. And what we're going to see is, more in the later, as I go on, than now, is there are lots and lots of things that could be made from starch. Okay, we're going to see this a bunch of times. This part of the chart is going to get bigger. It's going to get filled in. Okay, there's lots of things you can make from starch. And you can make those, wait 1 second. You can make those things from any starch that you want to. There's no difference whether you make maltose out of corn or out of rice or sweet potato. It's all the same. Maltose is maltose. How does a person decide whether he should make it out of wheat or corn or sweet potato or rice? How does he make that decision? How does the company who wants to make maltose decide which one they should use? But I'm saying it for maltose, we're going to say it 10 more times for other things. How does he know which one he should use? The end product is the same. It's all the same end product. And the answer is?
Right. Money.
It depends which one's cheaper. Okay, the end product is all the same. And convenience. Money and convenience. Okay, so that means this is a huge nafkamina. The nafkamina is like this. If this farmer is if this company is in Japan he's going to use rice. Because rice is really very available. He has lots of rice around. So rice is the cheap grain that he wants to use. He's going to use rice. If you use in China, they use sweet potatoes. That's what they have lots of. That's an easy, cheap, available source of starch. If they're in Europe, they're going to use wheat. Europe's got loads of wheat. That's what they're going to use. Their stuff is going to be pure chametz. If they were in Australia, they might use milk. They have lactose or sugar from milk. They might use that to make some of these, not this exactly, but some of the other things they might use. And in America, they're going to use corn. Okay? You ever drive down the highway? As far as you can't stop seeing enough of the corn. We're up to our noses in corn, okay? So we use wheat in America to make things that have to be wheat, like pretzels. Okay? And cookies, we make them out of wheat. But everything that doesn't have, anything that could be anything, we make it out of corn, because we got loads of corn. Corn is all over the place. So for us, when we have a thing like maltose, when we see maltose, it's going to be more of an issue when later as we fill in the rest of this page. When we see maltose that was made in the United States, we say, that's kitnius with a chametz maimed. That's what we know what it is. We don't think that it's pure. If we saw that same thing that came from Belgium, we would say, that's chametz. If we saw that thing made in the United States, we say, it's kitnius with a chametz maimed in it. Okay? Which, for right now, that doesn't make as much of a difference. Chametz maimed is still usher. It's also drabanan. It's a little less serious. But later, as we go filling in the chart, you'll see things that are going to be completely mutter because of that. Okay. And I mentioned, but I'll talk, one more sentence. Here on the paper is that maltose can be turned into maltitol. Okay, what that is not so important. It's something called hydrogenation. It's not important what it is. It's a process. It turns into something else. But you already got the hint that says it's called maltitol. You already say, I don't remember all those things that Cohen said, but whatever he said. But maltitol, I think it has something to do with malt and barley. Something that's chametz again. In fact, it is. Okay, the for sure has a chametz maimed. Whether it's actually chametz depends on what the starch was. Whether it's actually chametz depends on the starch. But that has a chametz maimed is pretty for sure. Yeah. What do you want to say?
Two questions. One. Is it possible to extract the enzyme prior to chimutz? Like meaning sitting in
that is a good question. That is a good question. I suspect that there's a way to do it, but in practice there isn't. What I mean is in practice because this is not something that me and you do in our houses. You know, this is like done commercially. So
right.
what are they do it in the way that works best. They sit in the water and it soaks around. Could somebody sit in a lab and figure it out? Maybe. You know?
But you can make like a kosher Pesach company. Or
no, well, you can make. Wait a second. You can make a beta amylase. Okay, this is called barley beta amylase.
Right.
You can make a beta amylase not from barley. You don't have to make it from barley. There are ways to make it. Again, it's not the most common thing because it's so easy to get it from barley. That's the normal, common way to get it. But there is such a thing as beta amylase that's not from. Yeah, you could get that, and then it could be potential Kashrus Pesach. On the very last page, I believe it's going to be. You're going to find out how they probably would have made it, whether that is a Pesach strategy. You potentially could get it out there.
Yeah, okay.
So these companies just buy a ton of barley and then take out the enzyme, sell it to some other company, and then they sell the barley that's left over to
animal feed or whatever they do with it. Whatever it becomes, whatever the leftover becomes, it becomes what it is. But they're taking away the enzyme from the barley and using it for all over the place. Okay, you can see. I was turn the page. Turn the page. Okay, turn back the page. I'm sorry. Go back. Sorry. I just say one more thing. I'm sorry. One case I might have to mention while we're here, and that is this enzyme is used to break down starches into maltose. I had said to you. There's a common thing that people have, it's not here on the chart, that uses that, and that is imitation or substitute milk products. People who don't want to drink milk, they want to drink milk made of rice or soy or almonds or coconut. I mean, there's all kinds of varieties in it. Some of those, well, they taste really sweet, though. If you've ever tasted them, they're sweet-tasting liquids, like milk is. Milk has sugar in it. It has a sugar called lactose, and it tastes sweet. Well, these things have to taste sweet also. That's what you're looking for, a white liquid that tastes sweet, right? That's what has a certain taste to it. So, if it comes from a starch, think about rice. Okay? Imagine if you took rice and you ground it up and you put water into it. How would that taste? Okay, it would taste like porridge. Nobody would put that in. No one would eat that. Okay, so it doesn't taste like anything. So you need to break the starch down into sugars to make it taste like that. Okay, guess what? This enzyme is a good enzyme to be used to break down the starch into sugars. And it's natural. And some of them even says it on the package. Some of them are even up front and they tell you, we put in barley enzyme into it. But even if they don't tell you, they might be using it. So the reason why, the simple reason why these milk substitutes need hashgacha for Pesach is because the starch may have been turned into sugar using one of these enzymes. They have a maimed of chametz inside of them. Okay, so you need to know what's in there. There's other reasons, but the most base reason, the very most serious reason is it may have turned into sugar using this enzyme over here. Yes.
Does any baby formula that would be made of soy for kidneys have that barley enzyme in it?
It's not common. I don't believe it's common. I don't think they use it to turn soy into a sugar. I don't believe so, but I can't say for sure. The good news is most of the infant formulas have hashgacha on them for year-round. The hashgachas are sensitive to the fact that people need these for Pesach. They can't be certified for Pesach because they're all full of kidneys. So they can't certify. So what do you do? They can't be certified for Pesach. So the hashgachas obviously care about people, and they therefore will investigate and tell you can use a zillion brands that they've investigated. They know are okay. They're not Kashrus Pesach really, but they're just kidneys and it's okay for baby. So in that kind of way, you can find that information from them. With the milk substitutes, they're putting less effort than from infant formula. It's not as important. Even then, there's plenty of information about which ones are okay because someone investigates, someone looks into it to make sure that they're using the right thing and not using the wrong thing. That's But I'm saying the issue, the potential issue that it could be is that it could have used. Did you want to say something? Okay, fine. Turn to page 4, guys. Okay, there's only 9 pages. Okay, page 4. Page 4. Okay, now, if you take the enzyme and you put it into the right starch, I told you it's going to break it down into a sugar. If you take that sugar, the sugar is called maltose. Okay, at this point it's not important. If you add yeast to that, you add yeast into that mixture, it's going to ferment and turn into alcohol and carbon dioxide. That's what's going to happen. It's going to make beer or whiskey. That's what's going to happen to it. So, depending on which starch you use will depend on what you're going to come out with at the end. If you put barley together with this enzyme, you just have to take barley straight. If you steep it and make it itself, you're going to end up with beer. That's what you're going to end up with. Or if, I'll tell you in a second, you can end up with scotch. Those are made from barley. Okay? If you put the enzyme into corn and certain other grains, you can end up with bourbon. Okay? Depending on what you put in, that's going to tell you what you're going to come out with. Okay? What I just said was not fully accurate. Bourbon is not purely corn. Bourbon is mainly corn, but it also has rye and barley in it also. Consider like 30-40% rye and barley also. But depending on which starch you put it in, it'll tell you on what you're going to get out at the end of it. Okay, but you're taking the same idea as you're taking the enzyme from barley. They don't always use this enzyme, but it's very, very common. Beer and whiskey is a very traditional business. People do it the same way they've always done it. They take that barley enzyme, mix it with the right starch, throw in some yeast. The yeast turns it into alcohol, and then you have your alcoholic beverage. Okay? Now, the difference between beer and whiskey is something called distillation. I'm not sure how familiar you are. I made a really exciting picture of it. Anybody who wants, you could pay for me. You can have it. If I'll even order it for you. And that's like this. Water boils at 212 degrees. Alcohol boils at 173 degrees. Okay, so there's a spread there of 40 degrees in between of their boiling points. So what you do is like this. You take a pot of beer. That's effectively what you make beer. And you take a pot of beer. Beer, when they make it, it comes out about 9% alcohol. It won't get more than about 12-13% because the yeast will stop functioning. So you've never seen wine that was more than like 12, 13, 14% alcohol because the yeast stops functioning. But what happens if you want to drink bourbon? Bourbon's got to be 40-50% alcohol. How do you do that? What you do is like this. You take the pot of beer, that's what they call it beer, and you raise it up, you heat it up to between 173 and 212. I picked 180 over here. You make it to 180 degrees. What's going to happen at 180 degrees? All the alcohol is going to boil out. The alcohol's boiling point is at 173. The water is going to stay behind. So what's going to happen is you're going to boil it up, and all of a sudden the alcohol is going to be boiling out of there, and the water is going to be staying behind. Okay, now what you do is, on top of that pot that you're doing this cooking in, what?
Who figured this out? What a chap.
It's on the Rishonim. It's on the days of the Rishonim. Okay, you always know when things are going on in the world, or when you start seeing tshuvas about things. When a new thing happens, start seeing tshuvas about it. So the Rishonim, the Ribarshas, if I know, it's the first one who wrote a tshuva about it, because that's around when it was invented. So what happens is the vapors boil out. If the vapors boil out, you don't let the vapors just go out to the ceiling. That's good stuff. So the vapors are directed through piping. Okay, and at the end of the pipe, what you do is you put cooling coil, something cold at the end of the piping. So what happens is the vapors pass like this, and when they get to over here, they get cooled down. And guess what happens when they cool down? They turn back into a liquid. Okay, and then that liquid drips into another pot over here. So now this pot over here has got a very high concentration of alcohol in it. Over here, it was only 9% alcohol, but over here, it's 50% alcohol. I mean, a certain amount of water is passing over also, but basically, the alcohol is going this way and the water is staying behind. Okay? The alcohol and the flavor are transferring this way, the water is staying behind, you're ending up with a pot of high concentration. That's called distillation. Okay? So, if you take the distillation, you start with a beer-like item, you put the yeast into the sugar that was made from the starch, and off you go. Okay? Now, you could make alcohol not from starch. You can make alcohol from sugar. That's called wine. Right? Wine, grapes have sugar built into them. Grape juice is very sweet. It has sugar in it. If you put yeast into that, it becomes into wine. If you put yeast into corn, you're going to get nothing. You first have to break down the corn into corn syrup, and then you can make it into something else. Okay? Did I lose everybody? Everybody here still? Okay. So when we make a beer and a whiskey, and you want to know is it chametz or not, it almost for sure has a maimed of chametz, because almost the very standard thing to use is this barley enzyme. It's almost for sure. But is it actually chametz, or is it only have a maimed of chametz, well, that depends what starch you started with. If you started with corn, it wouldn't be chametz. It would only be kidneys. The base would be only kidneys. If you made scotch, well, scotch is made from barley. That's pure chametz. That was the starch with pure chametz. So depending on if you made rum is not made with starch at all. It's made with sugar. Okay, then you skip this whole stage. There's no maimed. There's no starch. The rum could be kashrus Pesach. Okay, the reason why people drink slivovitz on Pesach, okay, as people drink slivovitz and meat. I didn't say you drink it. I said why people drink slivovitz and meat is because slivovitz is made from plums. That means is that it's a sweet fruit. It doesn't have starch and it's full of sugar. So you don't need any enzyme in it. You just have to put yeast into it.
Is there any beer or alcoholic beverages made from only corn?
Nothing that you would drink. We're going to see later. No. There is something that's alcohol made. It's something that's alcohol made. It's going to be in this part down
Did
here.
somebody make a drink for Pesach?
So I said,
from these things?
well, like corn is kidneys. Let's remember, corn is kidneys. But we said,
It's found in
so we said,
somebody was
we asked the company, and we give a shot to. We said, does anybody make pure corn alcohol for drinking? We're going to find that corn alcohol later on this part of the page. Does anybody make it plain? They said, it doesn't taste good. Nobody wants to drink it. So they always have the rye is what gives it a good taste to it, and a certain amount of barley also. They don't really make it, but they make. There's another thing that people drink for Pesach, which is called mead. Okay, mead is made from honey. Again, it doesn't need the barley enzyme because it's already at the sugar stage by it's inherently sweet, sugary. Doesn't need to be broken down from starch. But you could make whiskey from, let's say, potatoes. Okay, and you get the right enzyme that's not a barley enzyme. You can make it, but potato whiskey is not going to taste good. Now, there is one way that it tastes good, and that is if you make vodka out of it. Okay? And the reason what vodka is you take alcohol and you keep on distilling. You keep this distillation going until it's pure alcohol. You get it to be 95% alcohol. Okay, at that point it's called grain neutral spirits. Means it's spirits, alcoholic beverage that has no. No. It's not good. It's stuff that has no trace of the original grain in it. It has no tom. It has no connection to the original grain. It's neutral. It's called grain neutral spirits because at this point you can't tell where it came from. If you make corn versus rye, they have a different taste then because taste transfers over. When you get to 95%, it's hopeless. There's nothing. It doesn't taste like anything. And then when you want to make vodka, you take that alcohol, the grain neutral spirits, water it down to let's say 60% or 40%, whatever you like. You got vodka. Okay. So it's pure. It's just alcohol, watered down with water. That's vodka. So you can make vodka for Pesach because you make it from potato, make it from something else. Now vodka
if it came from wheat, is there a level of panim chadoshos at some point, or it's
no.
always?
So that's a shayla. That was again a shayla we showed where the distillation affects it in the business. It's not like that. It's important shachar. It's not like that. Distillation doesn't change the din. It's still chametz. It's chametz. It's usher. It's whatever it is. But as far as taste was, could you make it for Pesach? So you make a vodka and then you water it down. And that's what happens is that vodka was the kinds of people who drink vodka were people who were much poorer. You can make it from anything, almost anything. You could
use the enzyme or does not use the enzyme?
It would use the enzyme, but could you for Pesach you'd have to find a different enzyme, not from barley. But potentially you could do it. It's within reason. You can't make scotch for Pesach. As much as you bang your head against the wall, you can't do it because it's made out of barley. It's not going to work. Now there are people who make fake beer for Pesach because they don't use barley. That's what you usually make beer from. They use a different grain and they use a different enzymes and they make something that's beer-like. Okay, but it's not beer. It's not real beer. Because real beer has to be made from barley. You know. So they can make scotch. You can make vodka. In America, vodka is commonly flavored because most people don't like the taste of it. It doesn't have. It's grain neutral. It's like it's pure alcohol. It's just drinking straight alcohol. So they have a lot of flavors to it because the vodka by itself is not so. It appeals to people. People drank it because they were desperate. Because that's what it was. Eventually, it developed a taste for it over generations of drinking this stuff. They developed a taste for it, but the Americans don't get it, and so they want blueberry and raspberry and like that because it doesn't have such. I'm not a big drinker, but okay, that's what I believe. Okay, next. Okay, so we have the beer and the whiskey. Almost for sure have a maimed of chametz. Very likely even are inherently chametz, depending on what they were made from. Okay, turn to page 5. Okay, now beer and whiskey have two byproducts that come from beer and whiskey, and they are the first byproduct on the right side. That's only from beer. It's called brewer's yeast. Okay, brewer's yeast is when you had to put in yeast to make the beer. At the end of the process, that yeast, I believe, floats to the top, or maybe it sinks to the bottom. I don't remember which one. It does something. It separates. You could skim it off, and it has a certain taste to it. Okay, some people take it for taste. Okay, My kids have potato chips that has it in it for taste. Okay, it's not alcoholic, it's just for taste. There's some kind of a taste to it. People eat it for nutritional reasons. They think that it's healthy. Whether it is not our business, but there are people who eat it like that. So brewer's yeast comes right off of making beer, and that's pure chametz. Okay, that's for sure chametz. It's made from beer. Okay, it's chametz. As opposed to other yeast. On page 9, we're going to find that other yeast are probably not chametz, but brewer's yeast is chametz. And the other byproduct of making beer and whiskey is carbon dioxide. Because what happens is when yeast eats sugar, it creates alcohol and carbon dioxide. So the alcohol is what you want. Carbon dioxide, well, if you're making beer, you want the carbon dioxide also. You keep the bubbles inside the beer. And you make champagne, you keep the bubbles inside also. But for most other alcoholic beverages, you don't want the bubbles, and they wouldn't last through a distillation. Okay, if you were paying attention, you had to distill it. Okay, when you would heat it up, you would lose all your bubbles also. Okay, so there's no bubbles in most of in regular alcoholic beverages, but the bubbles were created. So where do the bubbles go? So if you don't care, the bubbles just go out to the atmosphere. Okay, we get lots of drunk birds. You know, that's what you get. But if you do care, you could capture that carbon dioxide. And in fact, people do. They capture the carbon dioxide from these plants and sell it to other people. Okay, who wants to buy carbon dioxide? Well, who on earth wants to buy carbon dioxide? They're trying to make global warming. What are they trying to do? What are they making? They wanted to put into your seltzer and into your Pepsi. Okay, your carbonated beverages are made with take water and you get carbon dioxide to it. Okay, carbon dioxide is not made by a lot of people blowing out into the Pepsi factory. So they make it from these kinds of. Now, there's another way to make it. You can also make it by burning things. Okay, when you make burning things, it also creates carbon dioxide. It also creates, and that's what is suspected, of course, in global warming. Okay, this is not political issue. So whether it does, that's not our business. But burning things also creates carbon dioxide. But one way of making carbon dioxide is to make it out of when you make the production of alcohol creates carbon dioxide. When you put yeast into something, it creates alcohol and carbon dioxide. So how that affects seltzer and soda, okay, we're in Chicago, as your brand mind is, soda pop, okay, the way it creates, whether that affects it is a shaila, not for today. That's a shaila whether carbon dioxide that comes from chametz is usher. And I told you before, distillation does not take away the isser. Turning carbon dioxide might not be usher. Even though it came from chametz, it might not be usher. That's a shaila, not for today. It's a shaila whether that does or doesn't affect the food. But it's always a question. So some hashgachas will tell you, buy any seltzer you want for Pesach. Unflavored. Any unflavored seltzer, because there's just water and bubbles, and the bubbles is not a problem. And other hashgachas will tell you, no, you have to buy one that has hashgacha, and they're telling you that because the bubbles that are in there might be coming from chametz or from kidneys. Okay, that's why they're telling you that.
How are they getting the bubbles in the kosher Pesach seltzer?
So they can get it. Some hashgachas will let them get it from kidneys. They'll say that's good enough. They say we don't want it from chametz, so we'll take it from kidneys. Some of them get it from completely innocuous sources. I told you, if you burn things, it also creates carbon dioxide. So the company that's capturing the carbon dioxide to save the atmosphere could sell that to your Pepsi. So we have a great deal. Okay, you're going to see more in a second about how other people capture it. There are people who there's more than enough carbon dioxide to go around. So there is. But what happens is a company will attach themselves to someone who's by mistake producing carbon dioxide. Well, for him, it's a byproduct. I'll set up a plant right next door and say, guys, I'll make a deal with you. I'm going to take your carbon dioxide and whatever financial deals. I take your carbon dioxide and then I sell it to somebody else. So that's people do that. They connect to a company that, let's say, if you were a whiskey company 100 years ago, the carbon dioxide just went out the window. But somebody decided I'm going to chop it and I'm going to sell it to somebody else. The fact that carbonated beverages is about 100 years old. So somebody had this idea that we could create those bubbles and put them into food. Okay. Page 6. Okay. Now, we're now crossing over to the left side of the page. That is circus. We're now not talking about things that have connections from barley and their enzymes. Now we're talking about things that just come from the starch itself. And as I told you beforehand, all the things we're about to hear from now on, are things that come from any starch at all. Which starch you choose is completely at the discretion of the producer, and it's totally dependent on financial and convenience and other reasons like that. Has nothing to do. You can get the same product when you're finished. I'll say this. I'll throw in another thing. If you want to make something that's non-GMO, okay, GMO, genetically modified organism, you want non-GMO, then you're probably going to favor wheat, because corn is this horrible product made by Americans, which are they genetically modify everything, and corn and GMO is usually opposites. Okay, it's hard to find corn that's not GMO. So if you want to claim something that's non-GMO, you're going to get wheat. Okay, so your decision on what you're going to use has to do with properties. Like, does it cost more? I decide I want GMO? Whatever, something like that. Well, the American government taxes people who bring in sugar, so that plays a role in these things. You take by what's convenient. Okay, but the finished product is the same regardless of what you started with. Okay, for all the things we're going to talk about now. Okay, so the things like this. We take starch. I told you could break down starch into sugar. You don't need to use a barley enzyme for that. Barley enzyme makes a very specific kind of sugar molecule. Most people who are just making what we call glucose, just a simple sugar, do not need to use barley enzymes. They use other enzymes. Okay, where those enzymes come from, we're going to find out later. But they use other enzymes to break it down. And if you see popping off from the side of the glucose, from the sugar it says sorbitol. Okay, so you remember we had before that you can make maltitol. Okay, maltitol and sorbitol, they don't just rhyme. Okay, they have the same name because that's a reference to it. It's called a sugar alcohol. What it is not so important, but it's the same idea. You do this process called hydrogenation to the sugar, and tata becomes sorbitol. Okay, sorbitol, if you take it further, it can become ascorbic acid. Okay, so that's vitamin C. So you want to know how come my vitamin C needs to be kashrus Pesach? The vitamin C needs to be kashrus Pesach because vitamin C is made from sorbitol. Sorbitol is made from sugar. Sugar is very often made from starch. Okay, what was the starch that I started with? Okay, so depending on what the starch that I started with, a bunch of steps later turned into vitamin C. Okay, I went through a bunch of steps to become vitamin C. So does it need hashgacha for Pesach? I say, yeah, it needs hashgacha for Pesach because it could be chametz. What's the chances that the vitamin C in your apple juice is really made from chametz? Very small, because chances are in America that vitamin C was made from kidneys. Chances are probably came from China. In China, it was probably made from sweet potatoes. But could it be chametz? Of course it could be chametz. If we were giving hashgacha on an apple juice for Pesach, we would make sure that vitamin C was not coming from chametz or even from kidneys. But what's the chances of it really being chametz? For us, not so much. If we were giving this year in German, okay, if we were in Germany giving this year, we would say, oh my gosh, the chances of being chametz are very high because we use wheat in Europe. But in America, chances are not so high that thing is going to be chametz.
Can I just interrupt one second? So along this line, from the starch to the sugar to the glucose to the sorbitol to the ascorbic, at some point, it's still royal achila, this whole chain?
I thought you were going to answer a different question. Yes,
it's not
royal
achila. It's not.
Wait. One thing at a time. Okay. It's royal achila the whole plate. All these stages are all royal achila. Well, starch is royal achila, sugar is royal achila, sorbitol is royal achila, sorbitol is in your chewing gum, and the ascorbic acid is royal achila. So it stays royal achila. Is it nishtana? That's a good question. It likely is nishtana along that process. Let's think for a second. If you've ever tasted vitamin C, ascorbic acid has a sharp taste, it's an acidic taste to it, and sugar has a very sweet taste to it. So it's gone through a change, hey, it used to be a potato, it used to be a piece of wheat, and now it's vitamin C. It sounds pretty different to me. So whether that makes a difference to us, that's a different shiloh. That's not for either. There is a different shiloh. That is a shiloh. Should nishtana make it be mutter? For the rices, we would say yes. It doesn't make a difference. Whether for the rabbanon, that's a separate news. Okay. Whether changing it so many times might make a difference. For the rabbanon is what to talk about. For the rices, is not so much to talk about. For the rices, we assume that does not make a difference.
It's related to the gelatin question about even though the process is different, but the concept of taking something
a little bit related to gelatin. A little bit. Okay, I can take that. Okay, so we had these first things that are made from sugar. Turn to page 7. We are chugging along over here. Okay, now one of the more famous things that you make from sugar is something very similar to what we talked about a couple of pages ago, which is you can make ethyl alcohol. Okay, for those of you who are more chemistry oriented, ethyl alcohol is exactly the same alcohol that you have in whiskey and in beer. Remember, I told you if you give yeast to eat sugar, it makes alcohol. Okay, alcohol. When I say that word alcohol for the hamoinam, for regular people, the word alcohol means ethyl alcohol. Okay, the word alcohol for a scientist doesn't mean that at all. Alcohol refers to a certain kind of chemical structure. It has to do with where the carbons and hydrogens are lined up. It has nothing to do with things that make you drunk. Okay, so in other words, if you go into your bathroom and there's isopropyl alcohol, that has nothing to do anything with food. That was never made from food. Isopropyl alcohol, it has a certain structure that's similar to ethyl alcohol. They have different names depending on how many carbons they have. Nothing to do with anything. Nothing to do with us. But that has nothing to do with food. Okay, you have methyl alcohol. Methyl alcohol and ethyl alcohol are almost the same thing. Methyl has 1 carbon, ethyl has 2 carbons. The difference is that methyl is poisonous and ethyl alcohol makes you feel good. Okay, but methyl alcohol is poisonous. Okay, but there's nothing to methyl alcohol doesn't come from food. Okay? So we're talking about
Take isopropyl alcohol and put something in it and make it taste good. Could you drink that?
well, you could put Pepsi into it and make it taste good. You just mix it with Pepsi, but no, it doesn't. No. You can't drink
It was
isopropyl
used-
alcohol. No. I mean, again, you could dilute isopropyl
You
alcohol.
make vodka out of isopropyl alcohol?
You kill all your neighbors. You can't drink isopropyl alcohol. No, it's not. It's dangerous. No. Methyl alcohol is even more dangerous. No, you can't drink alcohol. No, you can't drink it. And again, the name alcohol is confusing to us because the name alcohol makes us think of things that you drink at a kiddush. But it has nothing to do with that. The alcohol has to do with the chemical structure. A scientist calls, and that's why sorbitol and maltitol are called the end of the OL at the end because they have an alcohol part to them, but it has nothing to do with, they're not alcoholic. If you drink isopropyl alcohol, you're not going to get high. It doesn't work. It's not that. It has to do with the chemical structure. Only ethyl alcohol does that. So the ethyl alcohol that's on this side of the page is the same as whiskey on the other side of the page. It's the same alcohol. You give yeast to sugar, and it makes alcohol. Okay. But in this case, we're not talking about ethyl. We're not thinking about drinking alcohol. We're talking about ethyl alcohol that's used for all kinds of other purposes. Okay. So this alcohol is the kind that in the United States we make from corn. When you just need the alcohol, the pure alcohol, go for it. You make it from corn. 100%. The truth is, you want to make alcohol for vodka, you would use this also. Same stuff, just the difference. We'll see other things you make from it also. But when you want the taste and the character of a good tasting alcohol, you don't do this, so you don't from corn. But if you want it for what we're about to talk about, then of course you make it from corn because it's cheap. You make it from wherever you can. Okay. So this ethyl alcohol itself is used in a few different ways. I wrote down here one. I have to get the name of this one. I'm not saying. It's used in flavor components. Okay, what do I mean that it's used in flavor components? Here's my page here. Okay, what I mean in flavor is when you have I don't know, orange flavored vodka. Okay, we can talk about vodka. You have orange flavored vodka. Where did the orange flavor come from in there? Where the orange flavor came from? So usually it's a mix of a bunch of different chemicals that give the taste that's similar to orange flavor. Okay? Usually it has nothing to do with oranges. It didn't come from an orange. You just mix of a bunch of different chemicals to make it taste like that. So those chemicals include all different kinds of items. So one of them that it can include, I'll just give you an example just to help understand the ethyl part of it, is something called ethyl caproate. What's ethyl caproate? Who cares? Ethyl caproate is made from ethyl alcohol and caproic acid. Okay? Caproic acid is not important to us for now. The ethyl alcohol part of it comes right off this page. Ethyl caproate has an apple taste to it. Okay? When that gets mixed into your food, so your apple vodka, we shouldn't have said orange vodka, your apple vodka, good chance has in it ethyl caproate that gets part of the apple taste. Not the whole apple taste, but it's part of the apple taste. Well, where did they get the ethyl part of the ethyl caproate? They didn't dig it out of the ground. Okay? There's no mines for ethyl caproate. They took ethyl alcohol, made like we just said. They took caproic acid from wherever that comes from, and they reacted them together to make ethyl caproate. It gives the apple taste to your vodka or to your anything else, whatever else they put the flavor into. So the ethyl alcohol has a role in making the taste in your food. Does that make it usher? Is that zevazagarim? Is that maybe make a difference? That's a good child. But at least we understand that it potentially ethyl alcohol has its roles in making a flavor. Okay? Whether it makes a real nafkamina, it's a question. But we would tell people to only have hashkacha because when you want to buy your apple vodka for Pesach, you want to make sure that it doesn't have chametz to ethyl caproate. Okay? Whether in din it might be both or not, it's a good question. But we're telling you to buy it with hashkacha because it could be an issue. We assume you want to be careful. Okay? It's used in lots of toiletries. Okay? And that opens up another shiloh that's not for today, but you should just know about it, what's called denatured alcohol. Okay? Alcohol that's used for beverages has a very high tax on it. Alcohol that's used for non-beverage use doesn't have those taxes on it. When I say high taxes, I'm talking approximately 100% tax. So the bottle of bourbon that you buy is taxed approximately 100%. That is, it costs them $10 to make it. They pay $10 to the government also. Aside from the $10 that they spend to make it, they spend $10 to the government also. But if you use alcohol to make a flavor or to make shampoo, you don't have to pay that tax. And the way you avoid paying the tax is by denaturing the alcohol. You put something into it that's either poisonous or tastes awful, and then they know you're not going to drink it. Okay? You don't just decide what you want to put into. The government has whole pages books full of formulas of what you're supposed to put in to do it. In Mamish classic government style, they tell you exactly what you're supposed to put in to make it taste, or to give that off taste to it. Whether that makes a difference is a shiloh. Not for today. It's a shiloh. Whether that makes a difference or not, that's its own shiloh. Whether denatured alcohol is an issue. If you pick up, I'll start the other way. If you look, if you call it the CRC, or you look in our Pesach Kashrus, it says that things with denatured alcohol, liquid items with denatured alcohol, you should only use with hashgacha for Pesach. That's working with an assumption that denatured alcohol needs to be kosher for Pesach, and that if it was made from chametz, it would still be usher, even though it has something in it that makes it taste awful. And if you pick up a package, it would say sometimes on the actual canister of, let's say, a spray deodorant, it'll say on it denatured alcohol, or it'll say SDA26. Okay. SDA26 means specially denatured alcohol. 26 means we're using formula 26. Okay, there are a little more than 50 formulas. So we did it with formula 26. Or it'll say denatured alcohol 32B. Okay, that means we denatured it using, they don't have to tell you the formula, they're just choosing to do so for whatever reason. Or it just says alcohol, it says denatured alcohol, but you could be sure that in your shampoo, they're using denatured alcohol. Okay? So that's the shiloh, but they're using this kind of alcohol. Okay, this is a commercial type of alcohol, this is not for drinking, it's used to make shampoo. It doesn't have to taste good.
What's the side that it's still usher if it's not well fuel?
Good question. Okay, let's listen to this year next time. Okay, that we'll do a different time.
It's machal between the CRC and the OE, right?
It's not a machal. It's a big shiloh. Too much for right now, especially if I've been going on for who knows how long. Okay, yeah, it's a whole separate shiloh where the denatured alcohol is an issue to it. Okay, different shiloh.
But now this denatured alcohol gets mixed in with a bunch of other
now,
things.
if you put it into shampoo, you're in the clear anyhow. Because come on, I mean, forget about the alcohol. Think about what else in the shampoo. But what happens if you have a deodorant? A deodorant is basically alcohol and fragrance. There's nothing else in there. It's just alcohol and fragrance. That's what it is. Think of perfume. It's just alcohol and a fragrance to it. So you're getting basically pure denatured alcohol. If you're buying mousse, you say, come on guys, think about what else is in that thing. I mean, who knows what else is in there? It's not rather pure. But if you're getting pure, then you have a shiloh to it.
Has anyone tried to ever drink that?
Try perfume?
Yeah.
That's true. Let's look to this year about that. About denatured alcohol. Okay. We'll talk about that'll be next year. Okay. And the last year on my list is like Perel. Perel is pure. It's 2% ethyl alcohol. You look at the package, you'll see it's 62%, but it's denatured. Okay, it's got isopropyl in it, I believe, and it's denatured, but it's basically pure. It was interesting because when we asked Rabbi Schwartz about that, he said, "I know we tell people that they shouldn't use denatured alcohol, this is what he said, unless they know it's kosher Pesach." He said he wouldn't even try it. He says, "Forget it." He says it's absolutely not royal achila. He said, "I know that we tell people that denatured is, and I know that this is denatured alcohol, but you're not going to convince me that this is the problem. So you can use pure. That's what we tell people." Kacha. Anyhow, okay. Okay, we have to turn the page. We're almost there, guys. Okay, turn page 8. Okay, now, if you take alcohol, remember, alcohol was made by fermenting some kind of a sugar, it came from some kind of a starch, into making alcohol. If you ferment it again, there's a second fermentation that you can do to it, using a different microorganism, and it turns into vinegar. Okay, so things that contain vinegar are sensitive for Pesach because things with vinegar are made from alcohol. Things with alcohol are made from sugar, and things from sugar are usually made from starch, and things that are made from starch could be chametz. Now, is the mustard in your pantry made from chametz? Do you think that the vinegar that's in there was made from alcohol? Yes. The alcohol that was in there was made from sugar? Yes. The sugar that was in there was made from starch? Yes. But what was the starch that it was made from? So, chances are that if we were living here in Chicago, it was made from corn. Chances are that it is not made from chametz. Is it possible it's made from chametz? Of course it is. There's actually one plant in the Midwest that makes their alcohol from chametz. It's true. But the chances are almost all the vinegar in the United States comes from alcohol that's not from chametz. Yes.
Sorry, what did you say? What process is it undergoing from ethyl alcohol to vinegar?
It's another fermentation. It uses a microorganism, if you want to name. It's called Acetobacter. Okay. You can't buy that in Sam's Club. But it's a microorganism, and it lives on ethyl alcohol and turns into vinegar. It turns alcohol into vinegar.
And this is not denatured, or is denatured also?
It's a really good question, and that you really have to see. It's really amazing how they did it. It is denatured. It's really amazing. It's real chachma how they did that. I can't tell you that. That's a big secret. I'll wait for next year.
According to this, all these products, the ketchup, the mayonnaise, the mustard, all those things, like you're saying, assuming we're in the Midwest and they're made out of corn, and I eat Pesach, so I wouldn't need a specific.
So if you eat kidneys on Pesach, you would have to know that it's not really chametz. In other words, like this, when I say that I'm assuming that this thing is kidney, I say it's like this. Should I throw it out before Pesach? So why do I throw it out? The din would say to me, you could assume that it's not chametz. I can keep it. Let's say someone who's, well, now, in this case, we're not going to have people who are sick and need to eat ketchup. It doesn't sort of go together. And who can't manage the Unger's ketchup for Pesach, and they must have Heinz. So there aren't that many people like that. But if there was such a situation where it was really pressing, you might say the ikra din is it's probably not chametz. But if you want to eat things on Pesach, we take a much stricter approach. We say, I don't eat things unless I know that there's no chametz in it. And we're only teaching the vinegar. There are other ingredients that could be problematic in there also. But from the vinegar part of it, I would say, chances are that it's not chametz. And if under the right if as far as keeping it, no, it's a problem. Well, you can keep it. The din says that the roiv is that it's not chametz, and it's okay. Am I ready to eat it? I'm not ready to eat it yet. But am I ready to keep it? Not a problem. I can keep it. Okay? But very much again, but if you ask the same shadow to a Rav in England, you would get a very different answer. He would say to you, get rid of all your pickles for Pesach, because the pickles are made with vinegar, and the vinegar is chametz. Okay? When you look in shuvas that talk about vinegar being chametz, it's because vinegar was commonly made from wheat, made from alcohol that was made from wheat. Okay? Now, there is such a thing. There are vinegars that are obviously chametz. Okay? There's a kind of vinegar that's called malt vinegar. Okay? Guess what that's made out of? It's made out of barley. Okay? They make alcohol out of barley, and then they make it into vinegar. Now, there's ones that are on the opposite end of the spectrum. Apple cider vinegar. Okay? Guess what apple cider vinegar is made out of? It's made of apple juice. Okay, that's why it's called apple cider vinegar. Okay, it's made of apple juice that was fermented into apple alcohol, and that was then fermented again into apple vinegar, called apple cider vinegar. Okay, so that shouldn't have, it's not inherently chametz, doesn't have any enzymes that are chametz, but it has kalim issues, because the same people who make apple cider vinegar also make malt vinegar and all the other vinegars. It has kalim issues. It has nutrient issues. There are sometimes they add other things in. It's not pure. There are other things added in the process of making it. But it's a lot safer than malt vinegar. Malt vinegar is pure chametz. The apple cider vinegar, we know what the base is. We have white distilled vinegar, which is commonly people use. That can come from any starch. We have no idea what it came from. They use grain neutral spirits. They took alcohol that was not 95% pure alcohol. They could have gotten that from any grain. That's why it's white. There's nothing to it. There's nothing else in there. And then they water it down, put it in the acetobacter, and you have vinegar. Okay? So that's our vinegar. And last but not least, on the page, and that is, now, the other things you could do with sugar, besides for fermenting, making sorbitol or ethyl alcohol, there's all kinds of things called fermentations. Okay? What's a fermentation? Fermentation means, if I have, remember I told you before that if you take yeast, a bowl of dough, and you put it next to the oven, the yeast makes more of itself. It keeps on eating the ball of dough, and it makes more of itself. Well, there's lots of other microorganisms that when they live, they either make more of themselves, or they have some kind of a byproduct that they make, which we like. Something that they make that we like, or that we just like having a lot of them. So what you do is you take this microorganism, you feed it sugar, you feed it glucose, and it makes more of itself, and either we want the item itself, or we want some byproduct that this item makes. Okay? So that's called the fermentation industry. We take these microorganisms, we feed them, we want to make antibiotics. Okay? We have a microorganism that we feed it, and it produces this antibiotic that we want to use. Okay? That's good for people. So we have to feed it something to keep it going. Either because we want a lot of it, we want a lot of yeast, or we want something that's going to produce as a byproduct. So we want xanthan gum. We put a microorganism into sugar, feed it to sugar, and we come back tomorrow, instead of a big container of sugar, instead we have a container of xanthan gum. What happened? The microorganism ate the sugar, and the byproduct, or what it produced out of that sugar was xanthan gum. Lo and behold, it's something else. Okay? So, the common way to do that is the way we describe it, by giving it sugar. You take this big vat, it's full of sugar, and tomorrow, instead of being full of sugar, it's full of something else. It's full of citric acid. Lo and behold, today it was sugar, tomorrow it's citric acid. What happened? The microorganism ate the sugar and converted it into citric acid. Okay, so that is made from some kind of a sugar. You have to feed the microorganism sugar, a glucose. That glucose can come from any starch. Okay? Depending on where you are and what you're doing, it can come from any kind of starch that you want it to do. So all these things that you see here, I have listed here a bunch of things here. We have MSG. You have rennet that you make cheese from. The rennet that you make the cheese from is a microorganism. It lives in animal stomachs, right? So we get the microorganism from wherever, feed it sugar, feed it glucose, And all of a sudden tomorrow, that vat of sugar turned into a vat of rennet. Then I put rennet into my milk, and now I have cheese. So if that rennet, if the glucose was from chametz, I've just been miming my cheese with chametz. That's what happened about 25 years ago, by mistake. All the cheese of Pesach was made by mistake. They had, one of the enzymes had been made with, the glucose had come from chametz. Okay, and nobody realized it. Okay, until it was like almost Pesach. Okay, and everybody was pulling their hair out of their heads, trying to figure out what to do then. Okay, so because it's a miming. The rennet turns the milk into cheese, and the rennet had come from a microorganism that had come from chametz. Okay, so all these kinds, I have a bunch of things here. So the yeast that you have in your house, or most of us have in our house, is yeast that's produced like this. They take a microorganism, feed him lots of glucose, and lo and behold, it turns into yeast. Or the yeast propagates itself. So the yeast that we have in our houses is most likely not chametz. Okay? We don't have sour. My house, we don't have sour. We don't have sourdough that's made from real chametz. I have a container. You open it up and you spoon out some yeast from it. That yeast comes from sugar. That sugar comes from a starch, and my guess is that it comes from corn. I can't say for sure, but the din of it says the right of it comes from corn. I assume that it's coming from corn. It's not coming from. So when I look at a package and it says it has yeast in it, not a package of yeast, a package of food that's flavored with yeast, I'm not so worried about it. If it said brewer's yeast, so we heard beforehand that brewer's yeast comes from beer. That I know is chametz. But if it has just plain yeast in it, then I'm not worried about that thing because that doesn't. I wouldn't eat it on Pesach. I'm not going to eat it, but am I going to keep it? I'm not worried about keeping anything on Pesach. Okay? Now, there's another type of fermentation, not listed here because it's a whole different style. It's called koji fermentation. They do that in Japan. They make that with wheat bran. Okay? Instead of doing it with glucose, they do it with wheat bran. That's a whole different shiloh. I've been talking for too long. I don't tell you what that shiloh is. At first glance, you say, well, if they make it from wheat bran, then it's chametz. That's the simple way, and that's what we assume, that it is chametz. There is a shiloh to it. We assume that it's chametz. But most of our things that we see from fermentations, which is, the fermentations is like wide open. I mean, it's like a zillion things that we eat that have these things made from fermentations in it, come from glucose, potentially comes from starch, and as much of a shiloh as it is. Okay. Again, as I said to you 10 times already, the shiloh is only as serious as the starch that it came from. Okay, these don't have the enzyme issues. This is, again, that was on the right side of the page. On the left side of the page, we don't have these. We don't usually use barley. They wouldn't use barley enzymes to do that. It's a different kind of style.